Ahoy, hoy, Rena.
Ahoy to you.
Hmm.
We're gonna go on a little journey here.
Journeying, yes. Welcome everyone to our journey, free association conversation between Rena K and myself, Dr. Bach Ho. We're both organic intelligence coaches. We help people reduce suffering and increase capacity to handle more in life with ease using the protocols of organic intelligence. You can reach out to Rena to learn more, excuse me, to learn more about her OI informed courses on healing from shame and for individual session work. And you can reach out to me for individual session work. Links in the description to learn more about each of us. In these live stream free association conversations, Rena and I try to aim both at people who are completely new to organic intelligence and people who already know its basics. We try to find the balance. And excuse me, I still have the tingling cough after the COVID recovery. Uh, Today, our topic is orientation is not just a resource. Okay. Rena, I feel like I'm going to go on the attack immediately. I don't know if I'm going to regret it later, but I'm just going to go with my energy and say that I have I'm emotionally averse to the word resource and the concept resource and the term resource, and I have a lot of reservations about it. I don't know if this is the best way to begin, but it's free association and whatever, who cares? Here we are. So resource is typically meant as anything that helps you in a time of need. So your your deep breathing is a resource, your friends are a resource, nature is a resource, swimming is a resource, hobbies, your social support is a resource. And then in the context of some so a resource in general is anything that helps you in a time of need, that's a resource. And then there's a somewhat specialized meaning or fully specialized meaning in the context of some therapies. The feel your sorry, the feel your pain therapies, where like, okay, let's feel let's feel your sensations, let's do the EMDR, let's do the somatic experiencing or whatever it is, and we're going to do your pain feeling, but then we're going to do some resourcing, like come up with the person you love or your cat or a positive image, or feel your where does it feel good in your body, get that resource going. Okay, let's feel a little bit of pain, okay, let's go back to the resource. So that was, I think I presented resource, even though I'm emotionally against it very much. I think I presented it accurately. So my why am I emotionally against it? The whole orientation is towards suffering. Like life is suffering. So I'm so glad you have your piano. It's such a good resource. I'm so glad you have such good friends. They're a good resource. I'm so glad you know how to orient, you know how to look around at trees. That's a good resource. So I have a lot of reservations about that term. I don't know if I'll stand by it. I'm just reporting an emotional aversion, but there's some uprisings of intellectual thoughts on the matter. And when I another thought I have, and I'm sorry if this is such a weird way to begin, but with the term resource, things of very different levels of importance are called resources. And I have a version to that. So deep breathing, that's a resource. And then having a calling, like I have a calling to talk about organic intelligence and objectivism, that's a resource. Those are very different things. My calling is a sacred value. Deep breathing is like one technique, or you know how to find five things to look at or smell four things. So to lump all these things and have a perspective of suffering and resourcing against the headwinds of suffering, I'm against it. I know I haven't even talked about orientation specifically, but that's my opening. And you can ignore it if you felt like, Bach, why the hell did you begin that way? But so are you interested in taking over? Otherwise, I can zoom
Well,
in.
I just as a little reflection on, first of all, you've just defined, right? Like a resource is something that is of aid or support in a time of need. Interesting whether it needs to be a time of need, because your first argument that it kind of you know points us in the direction of suffering. If it's defined that way, well, then, yeah, that's going to be how that's seen. But if a resource is simply anything that provides aid, support, does it have to be like, it's an absence of that creates suffering, or is it could be just the presence of it creates good?
Mm.
So if the presence of, water is a resource,
Oh, interesting.
that's not, it doesn't have to be within the context of suffering. Although if you don't have water for a long enough time, well then you will be suffering. And so yes, it would be the level of importance, getting to your second point, the level of importance of that resource would rise, right? So I'm hearing your 2 points. And I'm also wondering about, how people utilize the word resource, and it's taken on, like you said, within the therapeutic context, especially a somatic context, that concept of a resource is trying to help people manage difficult times, difficult moments by bringing in something that's more positive or maybe even more neutral. And so, in that sense, I'm understanding why people use that word resource. Because
Yeah.
why not bring in something more positive or more neutral if a person is, in fact, suffering?
I'm not, I'm done with what you're saying. Uh, I'm definitely done with what you're saying. I want to say one point on my end is I think one thing I have in mind is when therapists or coaches have a kind of super fragile or delicate approach in their work, and then the person mentions, "Oh, I have a friend who I love my best friend," and then the therapist is like, "Oh, it's such a nice to have such a great resource."
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
it could be like subconsciously or in a subtle way. I suspect I've experienced that many therapists and coaches kind of have this perspective of trying to reflect to clients that you have resources in times of need, and it's that's being reflected a lot. Like when you're suffering, when you're in need, remember you have these resources, which I understand fully, and that makes sense. At the same time, big picture, friendship is a value and enjoy it. Piano is a value and enjoy it. Walking, if you enjoy walking, going to the beach, eating, laughing, watching TV, primarily these are values, like enjoy life. Yes, they can be resources in times of need. I just don't like that as a significant perspective
Hmm.
on them.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Big picture.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing that I think is interesting is the idea that in various therapeutic modalities, there will be introduced by the clinician something that is like negative, unpleasant, like, and so the invitation in the nature of the therapeutic encounter is to start with what's unpleasant or to somehow follow the train of what's unpleasant. And so, if one does that therapeutically, which is very different than what um, organic intelligence does from a starting point, if one starts with that, then, well, yeah, before the person goes completely off the rails and completely breaks down, you better have some way of intervening and bringing in that quote unquote resource, right? So somehow helping the system shift so that it doesn't get too distressed. And so in that regards, it's people who are using resources and using that language often are doing it within the context of what's unpleasant or what's a problem. And what in organic intelligence we talk about is in terms of negative reinforcement. It's creating the scenario or setting up the scene to be, oh, let's do something, let's talk about this really unpleasant thing, and then we'll bring in a resource and help that come down. And part of what organic intelligence is trying to do is avoid that negative reinforcement process by starting out with more neutral kinds of conversations and seeing what happens from there. And sometimes it's unpleasant for people. That's what kind of the direction they're going. But even so, we're not trying to throw resources at people like trying to, throw a fire blanket on top of a fire. So often that's how people see resources is I've got this internal high intensity fire going on, and then I got to do all these things to throw water on it or throw, a fire blanket on it to calm it down. And that's a process that is questionable as a process. And so I think the whole thing around orientation is we're trying to help the system before it becomes a big, huge conflagration, like this big wildfire out of control. We're
Yeah.
trying to create the scenario inside your biology so you're not having to throw a bunch of resources at it, even though in certain situations that might be perfectly what's called for.
Yeah. So, excuse me, sorry. In in therapeutic approaches that focus on feeling your pain, let's activate some painful intensity. The concept of resource is major in these approaches because they're the ones creating the need for the resource. You're causing the client's pain, so now you need a resource. You're causing your client's disorientation. Their attention is hostage by their pain, so now you need to bring in orientation as, for example, as a resource. Whereas in organic intelligence, we're not aiming to create painful intensity. It may come up naturally in your biology, but we're not aiming to go for it. And so there's less of a motivation for this concept resource to undo or settle down the pain that we're causing the
Or contributing
or
to.
contributing. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think there's also um so in addition to our not aiming for pain and therefore having to find a resource to quell it, in organic intelligence, we're not trying to manufacture positive things. So, whereas in modalities that are feel your pain, and then have a resource, the orientation will be manufactured. Like, okay, you felt good job, you felt your pain, and then now let's look around the room, hear the lawnmower or hear the whatever. Let's do some orientation, get it, or go to your happy place and image, or back to your positive sensation. We're not trying to manufacture quote unquote resources. We wouldn't call them resources because we're not trying to deal with painful intensity to begin with. But whatever positive thing there is, we're not trying to manufacture it. We're looking for its emergence in the
Mhm.
natural conversation and then reinforcing it. So the positive thing is not a resource in the sense that it's helping you cope with suffering. It's just, it's a value. It's good,
Mhm. Mhm.
as in pleasure's good.
Yeah, yes,
So
and pleasure is good, right?
as in pleasure's good.
Yeah, I like that. I like thinking about this in terms of values and how the things that serve us and serve us well are things that we value. And I'm with you on that, that we're this idea of oftentimes resourcing it falls into the category of what some people will call like a moving away from value, right? Like I'm having something unpleasant, I want to move away from that unpleasant thing. And so resourcing the self in some way, doing something, which there's a doingness quality to it. So that's a whole nother point.
Mm.
Doing something to get away from whatever the pain is, or the thoughts, or the unpleasant sensations, is very different than the idea of a moving towards value. Values that we're moving towards because they're good and they're pleasurable and they bring goodness into our lives. And so we don't usually think of, oh, I need to go get a resource when you're moving in the direction of that which is positive. So your example of like, well, if playing the piano is a value of yours and you would like to do that, well, then you're going to move towards that. You're not going to do it in the idea that, oh, I'm having a bad day, so I better go play the piano,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
would be a very different orientation towards playing the piano and probably not nearly as enjoyable for sure. And so it may help some people to think about, the moving away from value versus the moving towards value, and uh, how much simpler it is in life to continue to turn our attention towards those things that we value, that we value, and pursue those, as opposed to amassing a bunch of tools and resources to deal with whatever's unpleasant.
Dealing with what's unpleasant is important, and pursuing values and pleasure is important, more important, and the main aim to the extent possible. And I'm not knocking the former either. I mean, avoiding what's unpleasant is certainly important. An example just came to mind. I was going to, I have a lot to say. Sorry, I want to temper myself. But one example that came to mind just now was you sometimes hear people say, "Oh, do you know so and so? They're so nice," or "She's such a nice person. He's such a nice person." And I've encountered in many situations when someone says that, they say it in a way that kind of suggests they've met a lot of people who are mean to them, and they're used to people being mean to them, and it's coming from, that they're a nice person. It's coming from, they're safe, they're not dangerous. And other times when you hear people say that they're a nice person, it's just more, it's lighter, it's not as heavy, just they're a nice person.
Hmm.
I don't know if my example is so great, but it's just that when you saying someone's a nice person, it could come from a place of like, for like, I'm tender and scared, so I really need people to be nice. I need a resource, versus I'm pursuing values, and so I like nice people. Not in love with my example, but there it is. May I flow on with my next?
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unless you wanted to say something, but
No, I'm thinking about in terms of orientation, but go with what you're thinking about, and then
I
we'll
am
get
too,
to
'cause
orientation. Okay, great.
I'm getting to orientation right now. I know that it was more abstract in my beginning. I follow, I kind of monitor myself and judge. And okay, Bach, can you get to your topic of orientation? And orientation is not just a resource. Yes. Here's the point. Orientation is not just a way to feel better when you are feeling bad, although it does do that, and that's an
Maybe.
awesome thing. But yeah, maybe. So I for example, I had a student, his car was broken into, and he was going into panic, and he decided, and he remembered orientation, and so he oriented, and it worked, and he felt, he was amazed by how quickly he was able to just not panic when that happened. So orientation can be wonderful for settling you, but it's not just a resource like any other resource, like deep breathing. There's a lot to say here. I'll make one point and then hand it to you, Rena. So one point I'll make is it's better than all the other resources. Man, okay, I guess I'm becoming less scared of just saying stuff. So it's better than resources that have you go into your interior. For example, find a pleasurable place in the body, or think of the beach and the palm trees that relax you, or do some cognitive thing like this will pass, or I'm not sure I'll get laid off. Maybe I won't get laid off. So if you're trying to find resources internally, the major danger there, according to organic intelligence, is that you just ping pong around in your internal thoughts and images and feelings. You're staying in the internal, and the internal, for many people, tends to accelerate and intensify very quickly and very habitually. So the more you try to find resources in the internal, the general danger is you stay in the internal and it just jacks up intensity constantly. Whereas orientation gets you out of the internal and lowers intensity more efficiently, more directly, more easily. So that's one point in favor of orientation is not just like any other resource. All right, I'm going to pause, recalibrate.
Well, and with your example of the student who was starting to panic about, discovering that the car was broken into and what that would mean for that student, the fact that the person was able to orient meant, instead of paying attention to all the reasons why they were upset and what this could potentially mean, and the catastrophizing and the emotions that go with that, like, that's all the interior that you're talking about, the jacking up of the intensity that is so easily, can so easily happen going internally. And so when he went external, or she, whoever the student was, when that person went externally, they were able to, in a sense, not participate in the raising of the intensity.
Mm.
So the intensity was happening. The person was near a panic attack. So intensity was already happening, but now there's a separation or almost a divorce from that in terms of their attention. And so if their attention is not on the intensity that's building, it's going to die down, right? It's not going
Yeah,
to, so
nice,
it's the
nice.
attention to it that then jacks it up. So in this case, yes, by getting external, that changes the focus of attention, and it changes the focus of attention onto something that is, presumably going to be at least neutral, unless the person's like looking in their car and noticing that the computer's
Mm.
gone and the wallet's gone, right? Like, okay, that would be a different kind of paying attention to the external. But if the person's like in the parking lot and is like, oh, okay, there's some trees and I can hear the birds and wow, that's a cool car over there. I kind of like that car. Maybe
Yeah,
that's the next car I'll get, right? Like if all of that starts happening, then the intensity that's going on internally has a chance to come down because it's not being continually fed,
nice.
right?
Orientation is more likely to settle the intensity, whereas trying to resource yourself from within tends to jack up intensity and keep
Right.
it ping-ponging around. Yeah.
Right.
I'm just repeating my initial point, but
And
thank you.
yeah, no, but I think that's also important because, like you mentioned, breathing and how often breathing will be used, and
Yeah,
and paying attention to your breath is also an internal experience, and for many people that actually doesn't work because it's a mechanism of trying to control your system. Right. And so from the conscious will, okay, I'm going to breathe in, 8 in and, hold my breath for 4 and breathe out for 7 or whatever the box breathing is or that whatnot.
yeah, yeah.
That's trying to impose some kind of external control on the system. And the system often will backlash, it'll boomerang in a sense against that inhibited control, as opposed to, if you are going to do something with your breathing, then just noticing exactly what it is that it is going to be the better than trying to do some kind of
Interesting.
resource around breath. Breath is such a dangerous one, and I think it's often important to say
Uh,
that if we reinforce inhibiting and trying to force our biology into a certain direction, we're setting ourselves up for challenges in the future.
y- Especially breathing. Like, I'm against breathing. Don't breathe. I mean, it's really like of all the resources, if you're gonna go internal, do your, oh, the beach. I'm at the beach, or do your positive self-talk. Don't breathe. So orientation is priority, but if you're gonna go internal, breathing is like the last resort. Like, so don't.
Generally, yeah, because that's going to be a tough
Yeah, yeah.
one.
Don't breathe ever. So, um, may I try to introduce another point in favor of orientation? Under orientation is not just like any other resource.
Right.
Um, I feel like it's complex. Can you cross your fingers for me, Rena? Please
All
cross.
right,
Okay.
done.
All right. Orientation will improve your ability to. Oh my God. I'm going to restart. I'm going to restart. You're going to go on a date and you're nervous and you're scared you'll self-sabotage because you have these beliefs like no one will love me, and then you know that one of your patterns is you do things that kind of sabotage a date so that the person does reject you, so that your belief that you're not worthy is reinforced. So you know that's your pattern. Okay, so you're going on the date. If you can orient, if you're oriented, that means attention can be connected to the environment. That means, oh, that has a lot of benefits. One is, well, you're observing more of your date, so you're able to understand them more and learn more and interact with them with more information instead of being caught in your interior. That's one thing. Another thing is that if to the degree you're oriented, the habitual inner routines won't be there as much because you're oriented. So the thoughts like, I'm not worthy, she's going to reject me, whatever the habitual thought patterns are, they're less likely to be as intense because you're oriented. Whereas if you try to do it like the CBT way or some kind of internal way to resource yourself or to work on yourself, like, oh, I actually, okay, try to look at the evidence. I don't know she's going to reject me. I know I fear rejection, but this is a new person and I have to look for evidence that she's going to reject me, not assume. And am I doing anything self-sabotaging? And okay, I want to self-sabotage, but I sense that in my body, but I'm going to will it. If you're trying to go internal to sort yourself out to not self-sabotage, that's much less likely to work than if you're oriented, because the more intensity you put internally, the more you perpetuate intensity. And those patterns that have overtaken you for weeks, months, or a year, or your whole life. So orientation is the way out. We had a recent one on orientation unlocks free will and rationality, and I'm talking about that here, where you're less likely, to the degree you're oriented, you're less likely to keep predicting disaster and less likely to somehow keep getting into disaster despite what you want, because you're taking energy away from the internal programming leading you to predict disaster and move towards disaster. Is okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Not be connected to reality, which
And
is
not be right, like,
right.
oh, her water is, she drank all her water, okay, I'm gonna ask the server to refill the water. Like, I could see that, instead of, you may not see that if you're just in your head trying to work on your cognitive distortions,
Right.
using a lot of mental energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Nice example.
So the first thing I covered was orientation reduces intensity compared. That's what makes it better than internally focused resources. Actually, I wanted to reflect something you said earlier. You said, and well, you said breathing is an attempt to control the system. I would say internally oriented resources are also, they want to control the system. I'm having negative thoughts, let me try to work on them. I'm having negative feelings, let me try to work on them internally. Whereas orientation, the experience of it is, I'm going to not interfere. I'm going to not interfere. I'm going to try to take my attention outward, and then the intensity naturally dies down. So you're not trying to control. It doesn't have that control quality, which is intense and tends to perpetuate intensity.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on.
Okay. Okay. And the point I just made was that it decreases the chances of aiming towards disaster. I know that it's a melodramatic word, but I'm going to be myself because I can't worry too much about how I come across all the time because I have to be oriented. So so you're less likely to aim at disaster cognitively, or just magically, like it ended up that your actions led you there.
Yeah. Right. Agreed.
Okay.
The other thing, can I bring up another point that I think in the few minutes that we have that is important? I think it comes up a lot with clients that we work with. And that is that because people oftentimes are coming in with this idea of a resource and then we do something to take a bad state and make it into a better state. Oftentimes when people begin to learn this concept and in a sense practice of orientation, they slot it into that same framework, which is, oh, when I feel bad, then I'll orient and that should help me feel better.
Yeah.
And earlier, I had inserted a real quick maybe into your example when you were sharing about I think the student and the idea that sometimes orienting in that way, when you're feeling bad, then you do this practice that we call orientation, that yes, the system settles and you end up feeling better. But that's not necessarily the case. And so in organic intelligence, the encouragement often is to the degree that orientation is a doing, and part of, we've talked about the effortless nature of things last week, but to the degree that it is a practice in the beginning, is we want to do that when we're feeling neutral or okay already. Like we want to start from a state where we feel good, and then in the practice of it, we're having a little bit of activation and then a little bit of deactivation, and it's in a sense setting the system up for the future that things will not be as upsetting and you won't need resources as much. And so it's much more of a preventative care kind of approach than a remedial, hey, we're in a problem, and therefore now we need to somehow fix something.
Oh,
Like, so
yeah.
the difference between preventative care versus like acute treatment might be the way of describing it. That we don't look at orientation as a resource in terms of some kind of a treatment, acute treatment modality. We look at orientation as a process or a practice that we do that in time becomes automatic, that is really going to prevent us from future experiences of dysregulation.
Thank you. Can I go over by a few minutes?
Sure.
Or do you, okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
I want to make I want share an anecdote. So you said, nice. You said we want to do orientation when it's easy because that's when it's really orientation, and the better. So as it's good to think of it as preventative care, and if it needs to be acute treatment, then that's also good when it works. So it can be acute treatment as a resource in suffering if it works, and then to increase the chances of that happening, of it being likely to be successful as acute treatment, we want to do preventative care. And also, it's just the baseline indicator that you're doing well. I mean, I'm oriented. My attention is not hostage by the interior. So it's preventative care, acute treatment, and oh, I'm oriented. That means I'm kind of better now. I'm kind of at my normal baseline. I'm not in the thick of intensity. And yeah, I will share this because I think it's a dramatic example. So you helped me through this when I got a death threat. So when you're a controversial person and you have controversial ideas, you may get death threats, and you may get people, and like serious ones, that like, here's your address, here are the members of your family, I'm going to list them in order, and pictures of like decapitated heads, decapitated bodies. I mean, so I got a death threat, and that was I mean, I got disoriented. So before I got the death threat, I was oriented, and then I got the death threat, and then it was like alarm, 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 and then I just went into, okay, I'm going to drive to the police. And as I was driving and getting into the to meet with the cop, I was, okay, you're not oriented. So I knew that. And so I did as much as I could while waiting in the waiting room for the police. And then he brought me to his office, and then he had to do something else and come back to the room. So there's a plant in the office. So I was doing as much orientation as I could. That was definitely orientation as a resource. And it was working. It was helping me not be so alarmed. Like, okay, I'm going to look at the plant, look at the walls in the police room. And then orientation definitely was a resource that helped me get through that death threat period. And then when it returned, orientation returned, it was like, okay, I made it. And how do I know orientation has returned? I mean, in full beauty.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Well,
So the preventative care of organic intelligence living is orientation helps, and then it's more likely to be there in acute treatment, and it's much easier to look at a plant than, okay, what are the chances I'm going to be killed? I mean, I'm going to assume, because that's like, I could try to CVT myself, but if you can just look at a plant instead of like, are my thoughts correct? And it's, what if he does attack, but should I learn self-defense? That's a lot of intensity to kind of go through, instead of, how about I just look at the plant for now? It's
yeah,
easy.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then I rebounded, and then orientation.
right.
And my capacity is increased because I'm ready for the next death threat. So that was,
And you might have, in that process of orientation, come up with good solutions,
yeah.
right? Like better solutions than if you were trying to quell what was going on
Yes.
in terms of your interior, because now you have more bandwidth to know what the right action or the best action would be.
Actually, yeah. When they asked me, they located a possible suspect. Do I want to pursue it or let it go? And I decided to let it go.
Hmm.
So I never
Oh,
pursued it. I thought, and it was, I felt like, when I was confronting that choice, it was just, you know what? I think I'm gonna, as I look around the room and look at the plant, and I'm good. Let's just get back to life and not
yeah.
like think about hunting whoever death threatened me, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and clearly that choice has worked.
yeah. Yes.
Right.
Okay, so that was an intense example, but I just wanted to share it. Okay, to summarize, Orientation is not just a resource. I'm against that word. I'm against breathing. And orientation is better because internal resources tend to jack up intensity, control tends to jack up intensity, and you're less likely to predict and aim towards disaster. And thank you, Rena. It can be a preventative treatment and preventative care, acute treatment, and then the sign of having survived and rebounded.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All
Any
right.
last words, Rena?
No, I think that's a good place to leave it. I think we've given some people something to think about and the possibility of, obviously we're not trying to be against you using resources, and we're not going to, tell you not to do things that feel good, but, the hope is that you do things because they actually feel good for you,
You can breathe if you
including
want to.
orientation.
If
Hmm?
you want to, you can breathe if you want to.
Yes,
Okay. All right.
exactly.
And you can orient if you want to.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. See you next
All
time,
right.
Rena.